When we talked about the new tendencies appearing in Second Temple Jewish sources, I suggested that the rise of eschatological hopes for the redemptive and sometimes even catastrophic end of days was influenced by the growing disappointment in history, which did not present itself as a proper scene of realizing God's covenant with its just arrangement of reward and punishment. However, the despair belonged not only to the course of events in the public sphere, but also to the usually too short and troubled life span of an individual. It should not surprise us, then, that side by side with various trends of a general eschatology, there were tendencies in Israel's thought and belief trying to account for another kind of end, so to say a personal eschatology, arriving with one's death. Will the just be finally rewarded after death? Will the evil be punished? With regard to the meaningfulness of one's post-mortem fate, we first note a pessimistic appraisal found in some biblical texts. Here is, for example, the story of Joseph from the book of Genesis. Jacob, Joseph's father, was in deep sorrow, being sure that his beloved son had been killed by a wild beast. And you may remember that verse from Genesis 37:35. All his sons, Jacob's sons, and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "Now I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. According to the perception reflected here, Jacob does not expect after his death to finally enjoy a reunion with Joseph. The domain of death, Sheol, is that of a limbo with no personal existence. According to Josephus Flavius, this was more or less the stance of Sadducees too. However, Josephus' Essenes thought in terms of the man's soul surviving the death and standing up for judgment in the realm of souls. Joseph also emphasizes that in this sense there is a close overlap between the beliefs of Essenes and perceptions current in broad Greco-Roman circles. This idea of post-mortem existence of the soul clearly differs from the motif of general resurrection at the end of times, featuring at the end of the book of Daniel. In later rabbinic sources, there is an ample evidence of thinking that the souls of deceased enter, after a period of cleansing, a kind of heavenly abode, the abode of bliss. The souls, and here the sources undoubtedly speak about personal existence, will be there in the company of Israel's righteous forefathers, engrossed together with them in incessant Torah study, enlightened by the light of God's presence. In the rabbinic corpus, we also observe efforts to collate various eschatological themes, personal and general, messianic and non-messianic. As characteristic to such later elaborations on the existing variety of motifs, one finds there also attempts at harmonization and building an overreaching timetable. Here is one such typical timetable. First, everyone undergoes in his or her turn a personal eschatology and finds his or her place among other souls of already deceased. Then, at the end of days, the messianic salvation will come, which will include general resurrection of the dead and the day of judgment. It is vis-à-vis this variety of redemption scenarios that we will evaluate the patterns of eschatological belief reflected in the Gospels. One more observation before switching to the kingdom of God idea. We may see all the perceptions I have mentioned as being present in the Jewish thought throughout the late Second Temple period. For the most part, they might have remained dormant. However, at times of distress and or of renewed messianic hope, they would come to the fore. These were the times of outbursts of eschatological expectations, which gave those previously dormant ideas a renewed acuteness and engendered their adjustment to the concrete circumstances. The Great Revolt and the Bar Kokhba Revolt in the 30s of the 2nd century CE both, at least partially, exemplify such outbursts. However, not always were they necessarily engendered by explicit political aspirations. For example, one may definitely view the Jesus-centered tradition as one that engendered high messianic hopes, though in this case political aspirations seem to have remained on the margins and subdued, and were not translated into military adventurism.